Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to go to Greece, but I have to take a short uh, introductory apology to all of you, although I don't think anybody except Calypso and I have been feeling the effects of my uh, shortcomings. But this is episode number 600, 700 exactly. And in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be 94. And there's a connection. I went in the other room and fell asleep. So I left Calypso dangling, wondering whatever happened to the appointment we made for a conversation. But she's looking after her mother. So, both of us have some of the effects of age that are impinging on our lives right now means I'm going to have to speed up my process of transitioning to a successor. And I've got somebody picked out, but I was hoping to take a long time to make the transition. Anyway, now I get to say hello to a woman whom this is obviously peculiar because it's maybe the interview or the conversation that I've been most eager for at least 6 or 8 months, and this is somebody I've really been a woman named Calypso Nikolaidis who's in Greece, and this is my time to be with her. And I've known enough about her to tell you this. She is the chair in Global Affairs in the School of Transnational Governance of the European University Institute in Florence, where, for one thing, she convenes the EUI Democracy Forum. She is on leave for being a professor of international relations and director of the Center for International Studies at Oxford University. And before that, she was a professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard. Now, you can't beat that anywhere for a CV. So you see why I wanted to talk to her, and I've kind of messed it up. But now we're back on track, and I want to say hello, Calypso.
Hello, Meta. It's a pleasure to be with you and across the oceans and across all the challenges in our respective lives.
Yeah, that's right. But we have one big thing in common, I'm told. Mary Kaldor told me that you're the woman I should talk to because I'm in a period of enthusiasm about citizens' assemblies. That's the main thing I want to talk about day and night to everybody I meet. And in fact, I run this thing called Project Save the World. And to be honest, I think of all the different things that can be done to save the world now, maybe the best thing, the most promising one-shot fixer would be citizens' assemblies. So that's how my enthusiasm is going and why I wanted to talk to you. Tell me about yourself and what you do, and let's take it from there.
Well, first of all, Meta, I'm very glad that Mary Kaldor is our connector because she's a wonderful friend of mine, has been for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And we share both my Greek identity, indeed, because we do meet every summer with our common friend, George Papandreou, who, as you know, used to be Prime Minister of Greece, but more importantly, is one of the most committed politicians I know on citizens' assembly and more broadly, participatory democracy, what I would call real democracy. Mm-hmm. So, Mary and I share our Greek love of Greece and democratic rendezvous with Greece. But of course, as you know very well, she's in London and I spend a lot of my time in Oxford. And I think that the British sensitivity about democracy is very important, very important. I think this was what was at the heart of the Brexit debate. And unlike many continental Europeans, I don't dismiss the concerns that the Brexiters had about European democracy and its limitations. Mm-hmm. So we also have the British connection. Well, I have 3 nationalities, French, British and Greek, and that's why sometimes I call myself a freak, actually a freakish, uh, and you know, I guess for those of us who are exiled or who are constantly living between places, democracy is all the more important because we're not, at least let me speak for myself, I'm not tempted by ethnic nationalism, you know, belonging to a group of people with whom I share very much a culture and a politics. I mean, I do care very much about the culture and politics where I am from and where I live. I now live in Italy, where, as you said, I teach at the one and only European university. But to me, belonging and togetherness is indeed about speaking together and probably even more importantly, listening. Who are you listening to? Which are the silences that are the most pregnant and important to you, as well as the speech? So you asked me about myself and why am I involved these days with citizen assemblies? And I would say that I have always been fascinated by the question of how people live together in peace, not only in nation, but across nations. So my special interest in the democratic innovations is how you go from the very local to the very transnational and supranational, what I call trans-scale. How do you connect these different scales of togetherness? Mm-hmm. And you said the one and only is a citizen assembly. You're very enthusiastic about citizen assembly. Maybe here I would amend what you said, Meta, because I would say that there is no magic wand. You know, our world, and we are all very, very concerned by this world of ours where democracy is in trouble, not only backsliding in countries that still have, you know, some human rights, but there is repression everywhere. There is misuse of all of the constitutional safeguards that we are used to in our own countries that have been democratic, and much of the world is backsliding. So definitely, to me, this is the struggle of our time.
Well, and the reason I made it so key is because the other things, I think a lot of them could be solved best by the development of citizens' assemblies or the use of citizens' assemblies. For example, I'm completely preoccupied with AI nowadays and the threats that it poses. And of all the ways of maybe holding the thing accountable and making it less dangerous in the short term, for the next 5 years or so, I think if we had citizens' assemblies that would have some authority and in making decisions that AI might come up with a proposal, but we ought to stop it and say, no, you can't implement any crucial, fateful decisions for human beings unless you consult with a good cross-section of us who deliberate about what you're proposing to do. I would apply the same idea to nuclear war, nuclear disarmament, etc., which is another one of the biggies. So that's my reasoning. Is that a goofy proposal?
I completely agree with you that simply asking citizens what they think directly and not just by delegating their own citizen power to some delegates whom we call politicians or parliamentarians, but really having them discuss it directly and come up with, you know, approaches, if not solution, is key. So we share this together. My only qualm here is that it is not a magic wand, and that we maybe hopefully can focus on citizen assembly, but right from the beginning, we need to say they need to be embedded in an ecosystem. There are other democratic innovations that are crucial, and citizen assembly all by themselves, it's a very upward struggle. And I'm glad you used those two examples, Meta. So maybe we can take each of them. You know, AI and nuclear, my God, they seem different, But to some extent, both of these realms are realms where power dictates outcomes and not citizen power. Power of corporations, power of a few individuals, power of those who have either the levers of the state, that's nuclear, although there could be nuclear in non-state actors' action, and then AI, corporations and state together. But the point is, and the key word in these statements is power. And for us, all of us, to ask ourselves, okay, when you see a domain, you ask, well, who has the power? And do they have any interest, inclination to give up even some of it to citizens, to the people? Let me come back to your question about AI and nuclear issues, and the fact that these two seem very, very different issues, and yet they have in common the fact that they're both about power. Who holds power? The state, corporations, but above all, the fact that in our societies, powers gets captured. And if there is one pathology that citizen assemblies are there to address, if not cure, but address, it's the problem of capture, state capture and power capture in general by a few individuals. Now, we shouldn't be surprised that these individuals or institutions do not want to give up that power. They don't. Nobody who has power usually wants to give it up. But all the more those that have worked very, very hard to have a monopoly of that power, and therefore to control others, to control wealth, to shape societies, as Naomi Klein would say, end of time fascism, to protect themselves from the evolution of a society where so much is going, there's so many dangers, and those people with the wealth and power want to isolate themselves and protect themselves and control the outcome, whether it's by creating bunker cities or going to Mars. And so, but for that, they need wealth and power. And AI, of course, is a huge source of wealth and power. So it's not surprising that those who are developing AI know very well that the rest of us see that it's a two-edged sword and that it's like a tipping model. One moment AI can be very good for us. It can, in fact, support distribute intelligence and support our collective decision-making. And we can come back to that in citizen assemblies. We can use AI in citizen assemblies. So citizen assembly is not only about AI, but also with AI. But of course, right now, AI is developed mostly, except for open source AI, but by those who want to make a lot of money out of it, control, and don't really worry about the side effect and the tipping to the dark side, where AI can spell out a world, as you were implying, Meta, that it is very dark, and where we lose control because there is no way to know how algorithms were developed in the first place.
But it's not just money, I think, or the greed for control, but also different visions of the future or of what is possible. I mean, the people with the most power now in AI seem to be people who believe that you can implant things in people's heads and make us into, superhuman beings, and that we can go to Mars and set up a new civilization, and that it really doesn't matter very much whether this world survives or not, or humankind survives, because we have a better place that we're going to. And they have weird, religious beliefs and very strange notions that are, well, some of it might even be turn out to be valid, but it's the idea of turning over the plans for our future to people with designs of that kind, just kind of weird.
I was alluding to this kind of trends and patterns that can be kind of, it's an end of time eschatology, a kind of sense that, you know, the end of time is near, but we can protect ourselves, and AI will help us do that. And so there's of course huge amounts of writing and thinking about AI, and the problem is, so AI, Europeans believe AI can be regulated, that it shouldn't be neither a state tool as in China, nor a free-for-all corporate private enterprise, but be regulated. But the problem is regulators are always one step behind. And in fact, we're all one step behind, because I was going to mention the fact that any algorithm, even those who write AI algorithms, it will escape them because they build on themselves. And it's very hard to trace back. How did we get to this decision? How did we get to this outcome? It has its own self-fulfilling dynamic. So we are entering a world where those regulatory approaches that Europe is championing are certainly the only thing we ought to do, but we need to be very skeptical about how they can be done. Citizen assemblies can be there, and there has been citizen assemblies. For instance, the Belgian government held during the Belgian presidency last year of the EU, held a citizen assembly about AI. And they definitely converged towards the idea that, charters and regulatory frameworks need to be developed even better than what we have, because of course the EU already has a framework to regulate the AI with 3 different levels of risk. But the problem is it can't, it's too broad, it's too vague. There's not even enough regulators to implement it. AI is changing all the time. It's a race that is hard to win, and AI can't be controlled. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I am a bit more with Harari and others who, it's each of us in the way in which we conceive of our self-sovereignty that can best push back against, the overwhelming power of AI. That to learn at school, to learn in our societies, in our families, in the media, that no, I mean, I want a life where I decide what I do next hour, where my attention, my precious attention of my precious life is going to be taken. So at the end of the day, it has to be a mix between, yes, state regulation, but also our own self-regulation and our own virtues, as the ancient Greeks would say. But you did mention nuclear. Where were you going with that, Meta?
Oh, it's just I've been a nuclear weapons groupie, an activist for the last 40 some years. And I would, there's no way of getting an agreement among the nuclear states. And the problem is 90 or 80% of the world's population would like to see nuclear disarmament. But of course, even in democratic countries such as Canada, there's no initiative whatever politically to promote any such thing. So there's this gap between the democracy of what public opinion clearly wishes and what our country, our government is willing to try to actually implement. So unless we have a more accountable government that actually has to explain and be party to a deliberation process among a cross section of the human population, I don't think we're going to make any progress. And that would be my step in the direction of making some real advance toward real nuclear disarmament, is to set up more of a system of accountability in which governments have to, engage with the public, and the public has enough time to deliberate and and also is representative of the whole population. I think that's a good step, don't you?
Absolutely. And I have been, defending the fact that citizen consultations, whether it's referenda, citizen assemblies, ought to concern the question of war and peace. In Europe, we worry about Ukraine, but politicians say, well, these issues, whether it's what armaments we sell to Ukraine or, nuclear disarmament or nuclear balance, etc., these belong to people in the know, to the experts, to the politicians, the general, the technicians of all kinds. And I say, look, citizens will either pay very high taxes to have to produce more armament, or ultimately are the ones who go to die. And neither is a very, a good prospect. On the other hand, so that means at least they should be asked for all questions of war and peace, including the nuclear issue. Now, that's what Kant believed with his idea of democratic peace. This is why Kant argued that democracies don't go to war with each other, because democracies supposedly have to consult their citizens, or at least are accountable to their citizens, and therefore they will not so lightly go to war because of that. So this was one of his big theory, and it's become a very big, almost theorem in international relations theory, that democracies don't go to war together, which is kind of almost a given now. Now,
excuse me, it's true, but it's also true that they go to war against non-democracies with enthusiasm. So,
and they do, and they also build up nuclear armaments, and that's where we need to kind of problematize the issue a bit more. Mm-hmm. Because if you ask citizens in, say, Britain or France, if we only take Europe, whether or not they are for their countries to have the nuclear bomb, in their majority, they say yes. Mm-hmm. Because they imagine the nuclear bomb as on the defensive side, as a deterrent. In a world where nuclear armaments exist, we better have it ourselves. And of course, this is true for other nuclear countries, including, of course, most recently in the news, Israel, which says, well, we are not the kind of country who will ever use our nuclear arm, but in this kind of Middle East in which we live, we need to have the bomb. And a huge majority of the society agrees. But again, it's not just Israel. So the point is, citizens themselves balance their tendency to be peace-loving and for disarmament. And this is something that, of course, Mary Kaldor, our common friend, has thought hugely about. They balance that with wanting to be secure. They need to be secure to feel secure. And they think, rightly or wrongly, very often, that to be secure, they need to actually have the bomb or be allied, be protected by some superpower like the US that has the bomb, right? And then you have the proxies of Russia and the US and China, so their alliances, but it has a lot to do with indirect protection under a nuclear.
It's really best described by the prisoner's dilemma. Whether it's certainly better to cooperate if you can trust the other persons to cooperate, and it's the same with it's certainly better for countries to cooperate and disarm if you can trust the others to do so. But if you can't, then of course you're in a pickle. Should you trust them or not?
And the way in which the prisoner's dilemma, or the tragedy of the commons, when it's a lot of actors is often referred to, the way it's kind of addressed, if not resolved, because you can never resolve it, is that you build institutions to indeed build this trust, because of course it's an iterated prisoner's dilemma. And as you repeat your moves again and again, you need to be able to observe the other side and to get their commitment and to have transparency, and institutions are supposed to give you that. The problem with that is that, of course, there's always free riders, and you always never know, will this other country be a free rider? Will they hide what they're doing from us? It only takes one or two nuclear power to do that for me to prefer to have the nuclear bomb than not to have it. Mm-hmm. And, I don't think there ever was, Meta, but I might stand corrected there, a citizen assembly on nuclear issue, like a country
I probably, you're right.
I don't think so. And in France, should we keep the nuclear bomb, or should we have more bombs or less bombs? Or in Britain, or in the US? I mean, of course, I'm not very hopeful for citizen assemblies in Russia, although I have friends in Russia who are, very interested in organizing citizen assemblies. And of course, in Canada, it wouldn't be an issue. We can come back to Canada. But there has been very recent, in 5 years ago or so, 5-6 years ago, the nuclear ban treaty. So for the first time, a bunch of countries that that were under the nuclear non-proliferation treaty decided, no, this is not working. Nuclear states are not doing their bit. We're non-nuclear, but they're not disarming. So we're going to actually ban nuclear weapons. So they created this nuclear ban treaty. The sad part of the story is that only non-nuclear states signed the nuclear ban treaty, something like 132 states initially. So how do we get states who are nuclear to really do their bit, especially now when we see what's going on with Russia and the US? Trump moved a nuclear submarine secretly. I'm announcing he did, but not exactly what he was doing just a few days ago. Mm-hmm. Wow, we live in a world where even the nuclear taboo is being, overridden. Mm-hmm. So I would love to see, and you and I could call for a citizen assembly or a bunch of citizen assemblies in different countries, and maybe even connected supranationally to address the nuclear issue. That would be amazing, frankly. Mm-hmm.
I would love to work on that. But there are 100 different topics that I would also love to work on, and certainly. But it's true that right now I think that the rationale for getting nuclear weapons is stronger than it had been for 20 or 30 years because of the Ukraine war, and even maybe because of Middle East. Although I don't understand at all what's going on with Israel and Iran and all of that. That's anyway. Can I direct you back to something you alluded to, which I'm not sure I have thought about before, and that is that your special interest is in seeing the connection between the different scales of democracy, local and all the way up to transnational. Can you elaborate on that? Because I'm not sure I've heard anybody talk about the connection between the different kinds of scale of governance.
Well, yes, it's something that I really very much believe in, and which I actually tried to implement with this very ambitious and exciting project, which I co-designed and co-direct, which is called the Democratic Odyssey, and which you have heard about. You mentioned in the introduction the Democracy Forum. That was my initial move at the European University Institute to debate with many different actors, scholars, but also civil society, politicians, etc., to debate, what is the promise for democracy, and how can the good guys beat the bad guys, if I can summarize it that way. The dark forces that we're all talking about. Well, we need to open spaces for, you see where I'm going, but, I have that from all of that argued that we need to open spaces for what Robert Dahl, the great scholar of democracy, called the third democratic transformation. The first was in the ancient cities of Greece and the Middle East. The second was parliamentary democracy in the 18th century. But now the question that he raised, and he was very pessimistic, but, can there be democracy beyond the state? When a demos, people that, want to share decisions, is at the national level and also at the city level, regional level. If you define a demos as one of the ways to connect it to how the democracy works, where it's made of a bunch of people who peacefully accept to be in a minority one day because they know two things. They know they might become the majority, and they also know that while they're the minority, their rights will be respected. And that's liberal democracy. And therefore, you accept elections, you accept to lose elections, losers' consent is one of the most important definition of democracy. Now, you can obtain that at the national level, but can you obtain this at, I don't know, the European level or transatlantic or global level? Wow, that seems very, very ambitious. So how do you do democracy beyond the state? With international organizations, but also across countries that have to decide something together. How do you do it? So I started this project, the Democratic Odyssey, which has been in the last year actually doing it. And we tried to demonstrate that it is possible to have a European, so transnational People's Assembly that travels from one country to another and picks up new citizens in every country and sends ambassadors from one country to the next, and also randomly selects citizens from around Europe. 6 of members of the assembly. And what we've been doing with the Democratic Odyssey is inventing a kind of citizen assembly which connects those different levels. So the way I summarize it, Meta, is in Europe, I call it Europe comes to town. So we discuss European topics. How do you deal with crisis across countries? But we discuss it in the context of a town, of a city. In fact, we went to Athens, Florence, and Vienna. And we discuss it with citizens from not just from that city. So the recommendations, what we come up with has to do with the city and the country and Europe. So that's what I mean, trans-scale, that democracy needs to connect scales. People are much more concerned with what's happening locally. And, if I can put here the example of British Columbia, which was probably the first very visible citizen assembly 20 years ago in 2004, right, on electoral reform. And that was kind of the local, provincial, reform. And it's very hard for people. But on the other hand, in Ireland, we had citizen assembly that were national. That was on gay marriage and abortion. In France, you had the citizen assembly on climate, and then another one on end of life, and now one on school children, times, etc. So, and my friend Ellen Lendemore has been very involved in these assemblies in France. So you have national assemblies, yes. But as far as transnational, well, you've had the European.
There was an effort, it wasn't, I wouldn't have thought it would be very successful, but somebody put something together for one of the COP meetings,
Yes, that was in 21, and it was the Global Assembly on Climate, and it was amazing. And these people are, my friends, and we worked together. And what they did was select 100 citizens from around the world, thanks to satellite location, randomly creating random satellite location and having correspondence in these different countries and towns. And then all of these people met, of course, on the web. So it's a different model, but in fact, we're having a conversation as we speak, almost, Meta, between our different models of what does transnational assembly mean. In their case, it was local discussions and then internet. In our case, in Europe, it was literally local discussions, but the same citizens actually traveling, some of them, to the other city. So physically meeting face to face. And of course, globally, it's very hard unless you have a lot of funding and a lot of institutional support. It would have been very hard to kind of do this as a physical.
Well, already in Europe, Already this brings up the question whether you think you need to have physical presence among, at meetings, or at least some of the meetings. And I remember getting into a dispute with Hugh Pope about that. Do you know Hugh Pope? He took
Of course.
a year off to promote his father's to publish and promote his father's work on ancient Greek democracy, and he's very engaged. But he's one, and I think most of the people I've talked to do believe that you have to bring people together physically, the different participants in a citizens' assembly, so they get to know each other over dinner or something. And I don't know, because I participated in something about a year ago that was completely free of charge, and a very simple little experiment, but it was extremely impressive. And they had brought together maybe a dozen people from different countries all over the world. There was even somebody from Asia. I don't think China, but certainly several from South America and various places, speaking different languages. And they would have, I didn't know this was available, but whether it's Zoom or something else, they can do simultaneous translation in writing, closed caption. So if you were speaking French and I'm speaking English, you would see my words translated into French.
Sorry, was this on the web, Meta? Or
It was on the web, and I participated in 3 or 4, and they'd already done more. And it was amazingly effective. We even had a session where we were going through the procedure of choosing the topics that we would address in the next series, and so on. And and we had working class people. There was a South American man who was a laborer or something like that, speaking Spanish. He made perfect sense. We had good conversation with him. It had all of the qualities of being representative, if you can, 10 people can be representative at all of the global population. It was a pretty good effort. And we could speak to each other in our own languages and understand each other instantly. And it worked. It was wonderful.
So you're raising several issues at once in a bundle, which makes sense to me, Meta, but maybe we need to disentangle them. One is face-to-face and the other is multilingual, and then the other is who is representative. So they're all interconnected, which is why this whole thing is so fascinating. And I truly do not believe that in the 21st century, we need to ape ancient Greeks. I might have a Greek name, I might have a Greek passport, but I'm a citizen of the world. And in fact, I bet you that if Pericles came back to Earth right now in 21st century, he would love to use our new technologies for democracy. And in any case, Athens was what, max 60,000 citizens. Of course, they didn't count in the women and the slaves and the foreigners, etc. But overall, when they met in person, wonderful. Okay, the ecclesia met in the Pnyx. And that was amazing. And I got some of this vibe because our first meeting of the Citizen Assembly in Athens occurred. We did it on the Pnyx, where the ancient Greeks were doing it. It was an amazing sentiment for me when I opened this assembly and said, well, 2,345 years ago, the ancient Greeks met here and decided on things like whether we should build the Parthenon, whether we should go to war with Sparta, but also smaller issues.
By the way, I'm having a frisson. I'm having a shiver of ecstasy as I hear you say that.
I wish you had been with us. I'm glad you can be with us vicariously now, just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And at some point we will share some pictures. But you feel the frisson because you understand what was at stake here. It was amazing. And it was unique because there has been a few speeches there, but no citizen assembly. So we were very proud. It was an amazing moment. And yes, it speaks to the fact the citizen assemblies that we held, that so many other of our friends around the world have held. Many, many people would say, yes, of course, face to face, because nothing beats it. You have the vibration of other people. You speak passionately, and it's very hard to do on Zoom. Sure, but there's a huge but that, we are not a little Athens. We are countries. We are the world. We're all interconnected. Technology allows us to do democracy at scale, participatory democracy. So there is no way we can just simply pretend only face to face. To me, the challenge is to combine in the most intelligent way possible face to face with web presence, the hybrid assembly, which is what we tried to do with the Democratic Odyssey.
Imagine that you were right here, 1 foot from me, and we were having this same conversation. How much better would that be to you? How much difference would it make? I feel we're friends already, whatever would have happened here, almost 100% of it has already happened anyway on Zoom. And to me, that's a very powerful thing. I talk to people every day by Zoom, usually an hour a day, and usually very important people let me interview them. And I feel I built real relationships with people by Zoom, and there's hardly anything missing. I can't hug people, but, apart from that.
Well, I must note, Meta, that you haven't offered me a glass of wine.
I'll give you a glass of water.
And but I agree with you, of course. It's amazing what we can do. It's just amazing. Now we could have a conversation about numbers. You and me, we can have this conversation. And we share a lot of things, we understand each other, but as soon as there is more than 20 people on the screen, it's very hard. Whereas, an assembly of a physical assembly, we had our physical assembly had 200 people in Athens. But then they can create small groups, they can talk at break, they can laugh together in a very different way. So, but, I think that why choose? We need the best of both worlds. And you were raising the question of translation. That can be done both on the internet. Now Zoom does it very well. It's amazing. Even in the last few years, this has happened in the last 3 years that you can just do Zoom translation. But now it's a bit harder in person because you don't have the screen capacity. And we've used a lot of very low tech, so-called whisper translation, where if we have 3 citizens speaking, Estonian, there's somebody translating for them, or, the French or whatever. But we also had the good old translation with headphones. And then when people in our assemblies were kind of one-on-one, they could use Google Translate, they could use their phone. And increasingly, we're going to have, because the biggest, I'm sure you know this because you've discussed this with a lot of people, but probably the biggest budget line of transnational assemblies is translation. So, for instance, the most professionally conducted ones are the European citizen panels, which they don't even call assemblies because they're more consultative, and it's less of an idea of civil society getting to know itself than kind of giving advice to the EU institutions. So they have these panels of 150, very well done. And the translators is traditional translation, that is in their booth, translating with headphone in all the different languages. So it's pretty amazing, but it's very, very expensive. And the translators, for good reasons, they have to leave at 5, there are constraints and whatever. So I think they are fearing a world where all of this is going to be done by AI very, very quickly. And probably they'll argue not as well. But it's getting there, and it's going to be so much cheaper. This is one of my biggest kind of celebration of AI and technology is that the language barrier is going to collapse in citizen assemblies where you have several languages. So, and even in Canada or the US, you'll have English, Spanish, maybe Chinese, you have citizens from all sorts of backgrounds, and increasingly technology will, won't be a problem. So, yeah.
Tell me about your project more, because you say Democratic Odyssey or something like that. I don't know what you're doing. I mean, tell me the details of what it is that you're organizing.
Well, Meta, we will, include in this video a link to the website of the Democratic Odyssey so that listeners might want to explore it. And the beauty of it is that it is guided. It's a project that is guided by two core principles: radical openness and radical inclusiveness. So anyone out there who's interested in it, and above all you, Meta, you can join the network and participate in regular discussions on the web on how this project is designed and evolving over time. The project was conceived 2.5 years ago, to kind of try to be as effective as we could in a campaign. What is the campaign? The campaign is to try to convince the European institutions and European publics and governments to create a fourth branch of government in Europe. Maybe that's too strong a language, but at least a people's assembly, a citizen assembly of randomly selected citizens, which would rotate every year, and which would monitor European policies, which would connect with the broader public, engineer debates, everything, all the different things that citizen assemblies could do, and therefore provide a big democratic boost to the EU, because you know very well there's so much Euroscepticism, so many people out there who question the democratic credentials of the EU, and not always wrongly. It's often an obscure bureaucracy like our states. And so we really need a citizen assembly for the EU. That's what we are a consortium of 30 organizations. The EU, where I am, coordinates this consortium. And we're trying to promote this idea. Now, then which strategy? Okay, we can write papers, we can give talks. But 2 years ago, we decided, no, we're going to do something much more exciting and difficult. We're going to do it. We're going to make this assembly happen ourselves for 1 year. And this is what we've just done, Meta, for the last year, from September in Athens to Florence in February to Vienna in May. And with these were the physical meetings. And then in between, we had the hybrid meetings, the webinars. We have a digital platform where so we have 300 citizens, all randomly selected across 22 countries. And this was the prototype or pilot assembly. And we finished that first phase of Democratic Odyssey with this pilot assembly. And now we are going to continue, because these citizens, they came up with a citizens charter, a civic charter, citizen charter, advocating for all-out involvement of citizens in how states and the EU manage crisis. And advocating that this management should happen much more upstream, and structures need to be created so citizens get involved in the management of crisis. And we discussed this across the whole year. So now we have the result of twofold result, showing that you can do an itinerant assembly, a traveling assembly, and how we did it. And to look at this assembly, it came up with an amazing citizen charter, and this should be implemented at all levels, translocal, as we were talking about, translocal, transnational. So that's in a nutshell the story, Meta. And now we are looking to Democratic Odyssey 2.0, and a whole new range of things we're going to do to promote democracy in Europe, but also in the world.
I'm wowed, of course, but also a little puzzled about the connection, why it's a traveling meeting. Because if you have used Sortition and you have people from all over the place, all over Europe in meetings, they won't all be in Florence or Vienna or Athens together. What is the point of these physical meetings?
Well, we actually believe that these assemblies need to have part of their work in person. And and then why in these cities? Well, the alternative is they're all being flown to Brussels, the capital of Europe. But that's a bit sad, right? That Europe is always up there in Brussels. Europe needs to be in every city of you. And in fact, in the countryside, we hope one day we could, organize European assemblies locally, very locally in rural areas. So this is the meaning of this.
If you go to Vienna and hold a meeting, who's in that meeting? Just the people who live in Vienna or the vicinity? Or is it really a meeting of the whole, a plenary with all the members who live all over Europe?
And it is the second Meta, but with a big contingent from Vienna. So it's a bit of a mixture. That's why we call it translocal, because we bring in the citizens who took part in Athens and Florence. Some of them come as ambassadors. Then we pick up new citizens from Vienna. And then in addition, we have citizens from around Europe, also the transnationals. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Mm-hmm. And we are trying to say, look, you can do transnational differently. You can anchor it, ground it in local realities. In fact, we're having festivals, art festivals, music festivals where the assembly meets. And we are also starting to plant seeds, democratic seeds in these cities. So where Europe comes with its European topics above the state, it comes locally and it connects with local realities, because Europe or the supranational should not be floating up there far away from citizens. So we bring these European topics to the local citizens and mix them with citizens from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mary and I got acquainted when she was running the Helsinki Citizens Assembly. You may know about that back in the
Of course,
80s.
It's a big thing that she did.
Yeah, I used to go to them every year, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, to Europe. But and they of course were obviously in some locality, but I don't think there was any connection between the local issues and the things that. In fact, we didn't bring in local people to participate. It was always people who could fly in, usually at it's expensive, but people who could fly in to a meeting and do that. So and also, well, of course, there are other meetings like that, but I guess the connection between the local and the because if you make it local, you certainly do mean physical contact of some kind. And I'm kind of maybe wishing that away. Maybe it's not reasonable of me to brush that off, but I do. I tend to think we can do everything is essential digitally, which means free. I mean, absolutely, it's costing me nothing to talk to you right now. And I will have my birthday party in 2 weeks, and I'll invite 100 friends, and they will bring a cupcake and a candle to their computer. And at a certain moment, we'll all make a wish and blow out our candles and have our party.
Meta, you told me when we met that you're in your 90s, but you're one of the most modern women I've ever met.
Well, maybe, I don't know, but I fall asleep and leave you wondering where I went. Anyway, but I mean, I'm arguing that we can do this at no cost digitally, and
that's nice.
I'm planning. Oh, so go ahead.
No, I hear your point, and people. There is a whole movement for liquid democracy, very much grounded on doing it only digitally. And I'm all for digital democracy. I just don't think it's the only way people meet. Young people, the age of my children and my students, they're the same age these days. They can be hundreds of thousands in a pop festival, in a rock festival, literally. And the vibes they get there, it's amazing. And I've been to some of these concerts myself. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm not that young anymore. Mm-hmm. But the pleasure that the sense of we that I get from that is quite different Um, and and of course, the next day I will watch on the internet the concert or music, etc. But these are different realities, different realm, and I don't think we need to choose. Now, you're right, Meta, that money matters, and we can do things for free on the internet. On the other hand, people get tired. There are a lot of experiments show that. I mean, after 2 hours, they can spend the whole day discussing in person, like they did in Palazzo Vecchio or in the PNIX. In our case, whereas, if they're on the internet at home, they'll do 2 hours, then they'll get off and they'll, go and speak to their family. And so they can't keep the same attention and the same intensity and the same, perhaps, will to open themselves up. But I really would argue with you, Meta, that we don't need to choose. We really don't. I think the challenge of our times in democracy practice is really now how to connect the small meetings we're having. You were talking about 20 people on the internet, maybe even 500 in person or on the internet, and the broader public sphere of millions of people. That's the challenge for participatory democracy. And yeah, it can be advertised on TV or on the radio and in media and social media, but how do people kind of get it? How do you involve people in this kind of sense of pride and dignity that people have when they participate in these processes of citizen assemblies and participatory budgeting and citizens jury and all of that? Well, I think part of it has to do with there being meetings in persons. Then these meetings kind of ooze out, and our idea was to have festivals with panels and citizens talking about what they did. And planting seeds, connecting to the different struggles people might have on, I don't know, housing or transport or energy, locally. So that's the point. How do you make everything we're talking about contagious? And that can't just be because it's happening on the web, although the web is super important in the equation.
Well, I think we can do sort of a mixture of improvising, approximating. I'm going to do something that I want in my own mind. I want to approximate a citizens' assembly, but I'm not going to call it a citizens' assembly because we really won't be able to do sortition. There's not going to be any sampling, whatever. It's entirely voluntary. People can sign up. So as of October, here's what will happen. The people who are either members of Project Save the World, and there are 100 or 200 of them, and are subscribers, paid subscribers to our Substack account, and there are not more than a dozen of those so far, but I hope there'll be more. Those people will be eligible to enroll in a 1-month-long project, which will be not very time-consuming, but it will involve 4 different meetings, 1 meeting a week, the same time every week, for 1 hour, in which they will discuss AI, and they will be asked to do some preparatory work, watching some of videos that we pick in advance, so they have some background, and there'll be something to discuss. There may be a dozen people, or maybe only 5 or 6, but there will be each week a discussion. And the final meeting, there will be 4 meetings in a month, and the final one will be broadcast as we're doing now, not live, but will be recorded, and I'll edit it and put it up as a forum. But people will see the deliberations going on in that final discussion, and then there will be a document written summarizing the position of the group. Let's hope that they reach a common point of view that can be written up in a not very long document, which then could be presented to people in government, people in the various AI platforms that are actually going ahead and doing all these risky things to us. So this is a short experiment. We've never done it before, and I don't know whether anything worthwhile will come of it. It'll be run like a citizens' assembly each meeting, and the whole thing will only take 8 or 10 hours of each person's time, all in one month. I don't want to call it a citizens' assembly because the sampling isn't there. But I think that kind of thing, it can be done for nothing, just for free. People will do it for fun. Tell me that's not worth doing.
No, it sounds great. I mean, all the experiments are useful and important as long as they can build on each other and teach us something that could be reproduced somewhere else. So, I wish you the best of luck with this one. And to say that this is a great experiment doesn't mean that some other experiment which would combine in person and online wouldn't also be a great experiment. And you're right, if you don't have a budget, or if people don't have the time and capacity to travel, this is, much better than nothing. So it's obviously great. I don't think we need to decide, but above all, I'm very much looking forward to reading the report from your 8 meetings.
Okay. Well, we're just now organizing it. So, in fact, that's part of why I was reaching out to you. And I did last week, I've made some really good contacts with people who've had real experience. I've never been in a citizens' assembly in my life. So all of this is hypothetical for me.
I hope we can bring you to one.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, of course, I've been to the Helsinki Citizens Assembly, but it's just, it was a voluntary organization. Anyway, I think that I've made contact with 3 people that you may have actually run into. There's a guy named Paul Zeitz who runs something in the U.S. where he's planning to host a constitutional convention to rewrite the U.S. Constitution in about a year.
Yeah, no, I know. I've heard what he's up to. It sounds very ambitious.
Yeah, it certainly is. And then there's a woman named Marjan Essasi.
Yeah, Marjan is also a friend. Does wonderful work. Yes.
Yeah, excellent. She gave us some very good tips on how to run such a meeting. And night before last, I was nosing around on the internet, and I found a person whom I have not even explored yet, and I want to contact. It's a man with the name Archon Fung. And Archon Fung,
I used to be at the Kennedy School, but he came after I left. But yeah, he's a great researcher. He's really, really great. Very big in the field.
Well, good. I'm glad you think so, because I want to get to know what he's doing. And apparently, he's interested in using citizens' assemblies for the discussion of AI. And I think that is, that's exactly what I'm thinking of doing, is getting people to talk about AI. Human, ordinary people need to think about what's about to happen to us, because it's sure going to be a complete change in not only civilization, but maybe human biology. It's a big deal. Okay.
Oh, yeah. The AI, nuclear, and climate are the 3 biggest challenge of our time.
And I've been working on all 3 of them. So I want to see if we can use citizens' assemblies to try to raise public discourse.
Wonderful. It sounds like a wonderful project.
Well, look, I want to play around with, seeing what I can about your Democratic Odyssey, which I didn't even know about. So
we actually published a book entitled "Should a Citizens Assembly Complement the European Parliament?" So it's a whole little book with, I provide the introductory article, and then you have a lot of commentators commenting on it. And each commenting on each other. So it's a really nice book too. You can get I'll send you the link. There's a number of links that you can use.
So. Oh yeah, I'll appreciate any links that you can send me, because especially, there's Democratic Odyssey thing. I want to know more about that. And wonderful. Okay, I think I don't know about the time now, what this is going to add up to, but it's been wonderfully fun, and I feel I've made a new friend. So
it's been a pleasure for me. Thank you. Thank you for this moment, Meta, and I wish you a happy birthday in advance for 2 weeks. And we shall stay in touch and exchange. And I would hope that you can join the network of our Democratic Odyssey. It's called an Odyssey because it can last forever, like Odysseys do. So it's a project without an end, not without a planned end. So I wish you the best with it.
Thank you, and the same to you. It was such a treat to meet you finally. So indeed, we'll be in touch, and thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful day, and that your mom is well. Okay.
Thank you, Meta. We shall be in touch. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.